right, welcome everyone. I am Abby Stockwell with Department of Ecology, and I will be moderating titled More Bang for the Buck, Developing a Fundable SMAP Grant Application by Jessica Schwing, also from Ecology. If you have any questions while she's talking, go ahead and put them in the chat and we will have time at the end to get to them. Thanks very much, Jessica.
Hey. Hi there and good afternoon. I'm welcome to Skypeland here. Thinking about 2 minutes, a garbage truck is going to go by, so I apologize for that. But thanks for taking the time today to come in and listen to a little bit of information about how we can help you find some resources and funding to get your SMAP and other stormwater planning funded. So I'm going to talk about the dollars. So got some kind of lofty goals for 20 minutes, so we'll see where we get on them. But kind of the core things I was thinking for this presentation was to provide you some tools and some ways to help communicate your planning goals to both people within your organization and outside your organization, to help get a little bit of better understanding about the relationship between your SMAP, your stormwater retrofit funding, and successful funding applications, and identify resources for some SMAP development. And today I kind of geared my talk and towards the audience of folks who they know SMAP is coming, they know they need to do some kind of stormwater planning for their permit, or they know they'd like to go after grant funding for various stormwater projects, and they're either not quite sure where to start, or they're not quite sure what they're doing. They don't like, I need to do a SMAP and I'm scared. So this is kind of where we're going to start. First, when we'll talk about funding, we're going to do a little ecology funding fact or fiction game. It's been a long conference, so I think if you want, I think you have little response buttons there at the bottom. You can give me your response, but if not, we're just going to go through a couple commonly asked questions. First one, ecology fact or fiction. You can't get grant funding for something that is required by the municipal stormwater permit. Fact or fiction? Thumbs up for fact, thumbs down for fiction. Abby, are you able to see those little buttons? I see it up there in the corner. All righty. Well, I won't keep you waiting. That is fiction. Ecology provides grant funding through our water quality combined funding program for projects that reduce impacts from existing infrastructure. So back when the SFAP, the Stormwater Financial Assistance Program, which is the primary funding source for primary grant funding source for stormwater projects here at Ecology, we provide anywhere between $30 and $50 million a year for stormwater projects. The genesis of this program is stakeholder group got together back in 2013. They talked a lot. One of the things that came out of that stakeholder group is the recognition that communities, cities, counties, ports, local governments, they are burdened by a lot of infrastructure that was built prior to current stormwater regulations. You had a chance to attend Emma's talk about the history of structural stormwater controls. She provided a lot of great information about kind of when things began to come online. We know most of our stormwater infrastructure predates that, and the idea was to provide some state funding to help alleviate that burden. What we don't necessarily do with the SFAP funding is subsidize additional new development. So that is kind of one of the different pieces about stormwater. It's different from even like the initial stormwater grant funding programs or like our centennial funding program, where a lot of those were developed either when the permits were much more defined, and they didn't really encroach into retrofit. They were really focused more on just keeping new development from causing problems. And so along with that, we'll go with the kind of next question, or next fact or fiction question. Stormwater planning projects are a lower priority for funding than implementation projects, and I have a better chance of getting funding for a construction project. Fact or fiction?
It could also,
What's it called? You said something there, Abby. So I won't keep you on tenterhooks. That is fiction. Oh, I'm going to turn something backwards. Hang on. Clicking fail. Fiction. We actually want to encourage local jurisdictions to spend their money and ours wisely. We've seen that spending a little bit of money up front can prevent us from building infrastructure that doesn't do its job or protect water quality down the line. So there has been a big push to incorporate planning and into your process. We don't want to just design and go. We actually want to put that planning step up ahead. And we've been doing that since our first program back in 2016. Next question. Back to fiction. I can apply to the water quality combined funding program for grant money to ensure that my jurisdiction continues their current maintenance efforts. Oh, first of all, you're probably wondering, fiction. Maintenance expenses are only eligible for combined program grant funding if they are an enhancement to an existing program. You know, I kind of wonder, why am I even talking about maintenance? This is a discussion about SFAP. Well, SFAP, SMAP, and I'm going to gnarl acronyms all day, but your SMAP plan includes more than just your basic BMPs and structural stormwater controls. It also allows you to put activities kind of on the same par. And that was something that came out of that stormwater group too. There's been a lot of discussion and interest in looking at things like source control, extra sweeping, line cleaning, all as ways of keeping the pollutants out of the system in the first place, and looking at that to see if that's a more cost-effective and way of keeping pollutants out. So when you're thinking through doing your SMAP planning, you can also be adding in maintenance enhanced maintenance over and above work and that ties into your program. You can put it on equal footing. So that gives us a little bit of flexibility. So that's the end of my quiz for some of the common myths and misconceptions about our funding programs. And I think kind of last $1 million, or in this case, multi-million-dollar question that people want to know is, okay, what makes the plan a high priority for receiving ecology funding? What's going to get it high up on this list for rating and ranking? What I've done today is distill this down into some kind of 4 easy tips that you can kind of look through to help align your program and guarantee that you're going to move your application up on the funding list. The first thing that we're really looking for when we're trying to evaluate and review and rank a plan is how that plan, the proposal for that plan, lines up with our funding program priorities. In particular, our source of grant, our $30 million, $50 million source of annual grant funding is aligned with retrofits, meaning treating existing development. It wants to look at projects that provide a high level of water quality value and a benefit for dollar. And it wants to look at it, and we look at projects that are feasible, things that you can actually build. So basically, all of the criteria that are listed in our annual funding guidelines can kind of be dialed down into, can we build it? Should we build it? Those are our 2 pieces. And then in order to add that grant eligibility on top, we need to know that we're addressing urban runoff from existing developments. So we've gotten in the past few years a lot of projects that kind of come in looking a little bit like this. This is one of my favorite commercials and graphics because it sums up a lot of our planning processes. We want to find the best place to do stormwater projects, the extra most bestest place for stormwater projects. And this is great because clearly this little ad clearly defines, okay, extra most bestest. Well, I'm a vegetarian and I hate pepperoni. That does not look like the world's extra most bestest place to put stormwater projects, or extra most bestest pizza to me. So what you really have to do is in your program, and this is where we're seeing a lot of projects get stalled out is the work that's done up front to figure out and define what you mean by best. We have a lot of a dizzying array of data available out there about watersheds and different pieces, but usually within your jurisdiction, there's going to be some sideboards that you have to play with in order to actually translate a theoretical plan into actions that are going to happen within a foreseeable future. And I think if you got a chance to hear the structural stormwater control presentation and the lit review, you look and you've heard probably throughout this conference, the term best is pretty subjective depending on who you are. Is the best the cheapest place to put stormwater projects? Most convenient? The places that protect the shellfish beds? Is it best where it keeps the mayor's garage from getting flooded so I don't get angry calls? Almost anyone that you're going to talk to in your stakeholder group is going to have a slightly different version of what the best place is. And what's fun and challenging about stormwater is you're going to have a heck of a lot of stakeholders within your projects. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to work with those stakeholders to help define your plan and project goals so that you can make efficient use of your resources and start looking for the data and the information that you really need to make your decisions. And to start having that conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the terminology that we use, and we're super guilty of it here at Ecology, happens all over the place. In the water quality or the water management world, we are incredibly guilty of using imprecise language and assuming that everybody else knows what we're talking about. I have a game of play called Watershed Plan Bingo, where I try and look on different websites and different places to see how many plans that are called watershed plans and if they actually have similar goals in mind. And the answer is no. We went through an exercise with our team where we looked through about 15 different watershed plans, and it turns out they could be something labeled a watershed plan, could be labeled anything from a phase 1 permit requirement from the last round of permits, RCO documents, could be referencing a TMDL implementation plan, might be a plan done by Water Resources that doesn't have anything to do with water quality or only tangentially. So might even be a different kind of local plan. So that's one of those things where if you come in and say, I want to do a watershed plan, you really haven't, you're going to have some communication challenges. You got to be more precise. Guilty here, retrofit is another key word. When talking to different people across the state, sometimes when I'm speaking and we're speaking in the funding world, when we're talking about retrofits, we actually might mean building a new facility to treat water from an old development. We're talking about retrofitting existing development to put stormwater controls in place that weren't required when the development was created. Other places, when they talk about retrofit, sometimes that means take an existing stormwater BMP or stormwater facility and change it up to, maybe to add it, to change it so it provides treatment, or retrofit it so it's the more appropriate size to meet current sizing conditions. Same word, different meaning. So adding some descriptions and definitions in your communication and document can be really helpful. Same with stormwater management. That's another hot one because typically when we're using it and when I use it in this presentation, we're talking about providing, for the most part, treatment and flow control benefits to a local water body. But in other places, stormwater management plan means preventing I&I and potentially preventing sewer overflows, or it might just mean straight conveyance so that roads don't get flooded. I've heard all those different uses of the term stormwater management. And even the term stormwater, we use it very loosely here in the funding world. When the stormwater financial assistance program was created, early on the decision was made to not just limit access to funding to permittees who have permitted stormwater discharge, but also to non-permittees. And technically they're stormwater because it's not their urban runoff. It's not permitted, it's not technically stormwater at that point. So we use the term pretty loosely as stormwater when we really mean urban runoff. So, but helping to define some of these things when you're talking to your stakeholders and determining where you want to go with your plan is critical. Kind of continuing that chat about stakeholders is it's really important, and what we're finding a real bogged down point for some of these projects going through is the process is very iterative in planning. As Abby mentioned in her presentation earlier, it's not linear. You're going to make one level of assumptions, go back, review your data, come back and make another level of assumptions. And having a map and a guide to who your stakeholders are versus who your decision makers are will help you set your metrics, figure out what you really mean by best, and get the right people involved at the right time. There is, and this is one of, and you can expect there will be a lot of changes in this list as you go through that planning process, but having it lined out is going to be critical. If you don't have that kind of expertise in-house or experience in kind of mapping out who your influencers are versus who your decision makers are, and who can put a stop to your project, who do you need, whose money do you need, whose cooperation do you need? One of the resources is the Coastal Training Program. They routinely offer a program, the NOAA program, that helps. It's an excellent program to like a 2-day training to figure out managing stakeholders. They do a great stakeholder mapping process. Another good spot to check out is actually in the public-private partnership guidebook for municipalities, and that is geared specifically to stormwater managers. That's actually where I pulled this graphic from, but it's another place that can kind of help you map out who to talk to when, and who's on a need to know basis, and who's on a we need your buy-in basis, and who's we need your money and your resources basis. And this is going to come into play when you start to put your application together. In addition, I also mentioned if you don't, also don't have that in-house expertise, there are a lot of consultants out there as well who can help you kind of navigate this process. But as you're going through, be advised that you can't just have the farm it entirely out to a consultant. It's one of those things you're going to need to be heavily involved in. So the second thing we want to take a look at, and when we're evaluating your planning project proposal, is where you're spending money in your receiving water conditions assessment. When you're doing this, are you getting out of that assessment? What are the beneficial uses? What is the specific threat to these uses? And how much of that threat is coming from my MS4 or urban areas? One of the things places where you want to spend your money is in really good maps of your storm sewer sheds and outfalls. Colin provided a lot of great information about the Watershed Characterization project. Now, what we won't have at Ecology, or what we may not have at Ecology, is really what's going into every inlet and outlet in your MS4. If you're a permitted community that you've been required to go in, figure out where your discharge points, where your receiving waters, all these pieces are. This is a good way to use some ecology money to really refine that effort. If you have a jurisdiction with a lot of flat or low-lying areas, your directions of flow may not follow your topography. You may have a lot of dead ends where you think you're going to surface waters, but actually you're going to groundwater, you're getting dispersed. Being able to map those areas out as kept within your watershed is going to help you just reduce the amount of data you need to process, and also help you other permit issues down the line. Another place to spend your money is getting an easy to use GIS interface that will talk to all your different departments. Nothing helps a department talk to each other like a map. Your land use, your zonings, your topography, traffic use, development. Getting those pieces in a system that works together is critical for your communication, which is outlined as a key component of your SMAP program. Some communities have great versions of their GIS. They know exactly where all their drop inlets are. They know where things are going. Great. Some of the smaller and mid-sized communities don't have that information, and that's going to be really important for you coming in to your application and in your prioritization process. And then also, I know Abby and Colin would really emphasize this point, but I want to say this is a great place to spend ecology money, is documenting your process and your metadata. You're going to make decisions. You're going to have staff turnover through this process. Those decisions you make that are as simple as what kind of structure you're calling a catch basin versus a dry well versus other types of BMPs is going to make a huge difference in the long run as far as what you're recommending for maintenance or types of BMPs, et cetera. Spend some time interviewing staff to find out how accurate the data you're getting is and figure out where your gaps might be in the future, and just get this documented. Assume that you will know that this data that's gathered either by you or your consultant, the people who gathered it will never be heard of again, because that's the kind of data we see. A lot of data that's collected and we don't know how good it is, and we just have to end up throwing away and starting over when you actually start doing your prioritization process. Data is, and I've mentioned this before, but I really want to point out that this is another great way that you can get ecology money in order to help you meet your other permit requirements. There's a lot of stuff in that's part of your SMAP watershed assessment and your stormwater influence, your stormwater influence assessment that's actually going to really help you in just these other aspects of your permit. These are just a few off the top of my head, but having a great map of your MS4, knowing where things go and how they're connected, and is a great way to use college dollars. Want to caution and say, hey, think twice a little bit before spending money on monitoring. As staff, our grant funding does not pay for ambient water quality monitoring. So we all know stormwater monitoring is its own beast. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and you may not even get the information you need. Even collecting new GIS field data. It's the permit requirements don't require you to go out and get new data, and most of the data that you need to make an initial assessment and prioritization is already available, either through the Watershed Characterization, through your own systems. It's in a lot of different places. And when we look at a scope of work and we see that new GIS data or new data is being collected, expect that either as part of the application review, and the evaluator is going to call that data out when they're doing their evaluation. And part of that negotiation process, we're going to be asking, well, what difference in your decision will this data make? Will this drive what decision is this driving? If you can't pair up that data with a very specific decision, left or right, this type of BMP or this watershed or not that watershed, then you probably shouldn't collect it. There's been sort of a tendency toward an approach of go pick up data, go collect data and see what it tells us. Got to work the other way. It's I have a question and I need a specific piece of data to answer that question. It's the approach you need to take in order to be competitive in getting ecology money to fund these kinds of efforts. The other thing to watch out for is extensive cut and paste efforts from outside sources. It's very tempting to go and make a big tome of a document because there is so much information out there about watersheds, but not all of it is relevant to the question of where am I going to put this piece of stormwater infrastructure? Where am I going to change my management and how I run my MS4 in order to achieve water quality? So what's useful is you have to kind of go through and distill that information, find the useful pieces, and really get it into an elevator speech. Like I think that's really reinforced in the SMAP process when they're saying, hey, here's a table of our watersheds. This is the kind of information we need. We had a project that we were funding where they spent a lot of money producing, I think, we had 73 pages, I think something like that, for just information for just one watershed, but I still didn't know the relative influence of stormwater or anything upstream or downstream of the outfalls, those kind of pieces. So be wary of big cut and paste efforts. They'll use up your dollars and not get you what you need.
Jessica, I just wanted to let you know you have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'm gonna rush. I knew this would be too long. Alrighty. So plan stormwater action. The third thing we're looking at is, are the actions that you're looking at likely to be effective? What we mean here is you will need a tool or process to show your work, and that we're after precision more than we are accuracy. Whatever methodology that you're using for planning, you want to make sure you're able to replicate it, and that you're connecting the dots between the BMPs and the actions you're choosing and the change or the problem that your change you're trying to get in the water body, or the problem that you've identified. The classic example of this is when we see nutrient, we see a whole paragraph about how there's a nutrient loading problem here in this particular water body. We have a nutrient TMDL, and then we look in the BMPs that they're putting forth as the highest priority or flow control. Same thing with bacteria. So making sure that those planned actions actually line up with the issues and problems you've identified in the water body. And then also, when we're looking, we want to see that they're grant eligible SMAP action. So to lump in pretty quickly, things that are eligible for our funding program as in actions that we can pay for are building new flow control or treatment BMPs. That includes LID, updating, I'm using the word updating rather than retrofitting existing BMPs to meet current standards, removal of impervious surfaces, permanent removal, enhanced maintenance or source control efforts. All of these things, if you look, and these are the things, if you go to your structural stormwater control appendix 12, these are the pieces from appendix 12 that are currently fundable with SMAP. There are other things on that appendix 12, such as forest restoration buffers, in-stream work, or acquisitions to prevent development that are not currently in our SFAP program, but they may be eligible for state revolving fund loan or other grant sources. Also want to keep in mind that SMAP planning requirements expand beyond just doing retrofits, and also want you to look at potential build out scenarios and land use management actions. SFAP grants are limited to work on retrofits. And again, I'm using the term retrofits to mean BMPs for existing infrastructure. If you're gearing mostly towards planning for new development, then you may be limited to just loan dollars. It's not that we can't provide you assistance, but it won't be grant funding. Big question that's going to pop up. What if water quality benefit isn't your decision maker's top priority? This is likely to happen. Right now, the goal of SMAP is to help move us towards targeted stormwater quality projects, meaning BMPs putting our dollars in areas that are most likely to be improved when we fix stormwater problems. The way our current program works is we're primarily funding opportunistic stormwater quality projects. Those are the two ends of the spectrum. Things where, hey, it's not the primary driver, but we're going to still get a water quality benefit out of it. SFAP can fund all of these things, but our priorities for the top of the list are going to be these targeted stormwater projects. On the real high end are going to be things where, very sophisticated programs where you say, hey, this many projects is likely to get us to clean water. I don't know that anybody, I haven't seen too many projects or jurisdictions that are at that point yet. We are still funding all the way through opportunistic type projects. Questions going to pop up. Are projects outside the SMAP planning eligible for grant funding? Yes, they are. Your jurisdiction, your jurisdiction-wide stormwater quality CIP, which is lots of other names for that. It can be a comprehensive manning, et cetera, is likely to have a combination of jurisdiction-wide opportunistic projects, SMAP targeted projects, and opportunistic projects within your target SMAP basin. It's going to be different. Those percentages are going to be different for each local government, and we expect that they'll change over time. We can fund all of those things. And the last thing that we're going to look at is that some assurances that this thing is not going to gather dust and it's actually going to adapt over time. It's going to be durable. It won't sit on a shelf. These are the things we're looking for in an application to show us that you actually intend on using this plan. First and foremost, we're going to see a lot of the local government staff, not just consultants, on the application project team. A lot of this work is going to require having the actual government staff time in there shows us that managers have determined this is important enough to spend staff time on, not just, hey, I'm going to go buy this thing and put it on the shelf. We want to see the decision makers up the chain and down are included in your stakeholder process. And that one great way to indicate is that in your scope of work that you're going to undergo through your plan is to adopt this as a decision, as a governing body, undergo the SEPA review. And that we want to see that your adaptive management cycle and process is not just an afterthought, but it's actually buddied onto or tagged in with some other required plan update, your comprehensive plan, wherever it is needs to be tied. If you can tie it into something that's going to be required, it's more likely to not just get kind of left until someone has time to update it 10 years, 15, 30 years down the line. Next one, summary. Here it is. Understand what best really means to the people in your organization who have your resources and communicate that clearly in your application. We'll fund opportunistic, we'll fund targeted. We need to know, but don't try and disguise one as the other. Don't spend money on gathering data in hopes it shows you something. Know how your data is going to influence the decision. Explain how you're connecting the dots between your actions and the problem. Don't plan on solving water quality problems with stormwater money that aren't related to stormwater. If you're looking and your watershed is primarily influenced by agricultural areas, your stormwater is 0.0002% of the problem. Don't assume that we're going to put that as a high priority on our funding list. And then provide us some evidence that that you're going to use the plan. And here we go. And there's my takeaway words. If you don't know where you're going, if your plan is a roadmap, you need to know where you start. You need to know where you're going. If you don't know where you go, anywhere will take you there. It's going to have some detours. Stormwater is evolving science. Your plans are going to need to evolve along with it. And we're going to, as a funder or as a reviewer, we're going to be a little confused about your planning process when we see projects come in. After we funded a plan, you come in 2 years later for a project that wasn't mentioned anywhere in your plan, it's going to be a red flag to us. So think ahead about what you're going to need to fund realistically with your dollars and with our dollars over the next 5 to 10 years. And that is where I'm going to end it. Save the date. We'll talk more about the stormwater project application and go question by question and how you can answer questions for project proposals with plans, provide some more examples, including some scopes of work for things like enhanced maintenance, things like that, coming up on 8/27. Thank you. Over time.
Thank you, Jessica. We really appreciate you presenting today. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, you can contact Jessica with her contact information in the program for Municon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.